Okay, so we are now getting towards the end. This is chapter 8, and chapter 7. But the chapters go by pretty quickly, so I don't know. I never know how long I might take on this, but I'll try to get everything in maybe in this last video or the next one. Okay, so in the beginning of chapter 7, you see that he hasn't been answering the door, and there's no more parties, and the lights are off. He gets rid of his servants, and the reason why is because Daisy's spending time there, and I said this in the last video, that we don't know exactly what that looks like, but we can imagine. And so by the dismissal of servants, the Wolfsheim crew comes in, and so you've got this different group of servants coming in that aren't as friendly. And so he does a little bit to introduce that, and then it moves right into a gathering that is at Daisy and Tom's house. And Nick and Gatsby are invited this time, which seems kind of strange, right? Daisy invites Gatsby. And you can tell when Nick says about what he says about, it's like being like the hottest day they've had all year, that this would be a very weird day to have the awkward conversation that they're supposedly going to have. And so you get the sense that Daisy and Gatsby had kind of planned this to be the day to tell Tom that she's leaving him. Okay, so it starts off at their house. They're hot, and the daughter comes in, and I don't think we've seen the daughter at all. I've heard of her, but this is the only time she comes in. And this description of Gatsby when he sees her, Gatsby and I in turn leaned down and took the small reluctant hand. Afterward, he kept looking at the child with surprise. I don't think he had ever really believed in its existence. And then notice that what Daisy calls her is a dream. She's just a little dream. And it's kind of like she's not, a complete person, and has this relationship with her mother. She's got a nurse, which a lot of people did. Even Zelda and Scott Fitzgerald had a nurse for their daughter Scotty, and she said there wasn't really anything different about that because everyone did that. But you don't see a whole lot of interaction. I mean, this is the only time we actually see her, and it's very brief. And she just says, "How do you like Mother's friends? And do you think they're pretty?" And she says, "Where's Daddy?" So this is definitely a reality check for Gatsby. And he's been in denial, which I've said a lot about last time, so I'm not going to say any more about that this time. So at any rate, they start wondering what to do with themselves. They don't have anything to do. And it's strange that they will pick to go to New York and to a hotel where it's probably less comfortable and more hot, but that just kind of shows how they never know what to do, with themselves. They have all this money, it seems like kind of a shame to have all this money and luxury, and then come down to the point where you don't even really know what to do with it. It's just boring. So they end up, switching cars, which is kind of unusual, but you can see why later on. And he does it in order for plot reasons. And so I want to get to where they actually get to the hotel, and they get into a bit of a fight. And Tom had already done an investigation. He already kind of wanted to get down to the bottom of what was going on with Gatsby. But what really started it was at the house when she said something like, "You look so cool. You always look so cool." And when their eyes meet, Tom finally registers that she had told him that she loved him. And he sees the connection. what's strange is it's still it's when he gets in the car with Jordan and Nick, he says, "You almost think I'm really dumb, huh?" Well, this is the same kind of reaction Wilson gets when he's talking to Myrtle and whoever else is back to, think I'm not very smart, but I know what I know. Another thing I want to say about that I've missed was when they go get gas. Obviously, Wilson is very sick, and the way that he describes that scene, he says he discovered that Myrtle had some sort of life apart from him in another world, and the shock made him physically sick. I stared at him and then at Tom, who had made a parallel discovery less than an hour before, and it occurred to me that there was no difference between men in intelligence or race. So profound is the difference between the sick and the well. So they actually at this one point are kind of on each other's level. And again, that happens a little bit later, to where you can't take your money with you when you die. Once you have we're all kind of on an equal playing level when it comes to our mortality, right? It's our health, and I think that is kind of hard for some people to believe. But Tom's world is starting to kind of fall apart on him because he just realized that his wife is having an affair and that his mistress is going to go away. So the walls are kind of coming in on him, and he's so used to having everything his way. But out of guilt, he does tell Wilson, "I'm going to give you that car." So, then of course they're in the yellow car, and that's what Wilson sees. Okay, so they get to New York, and they start up again about the heat, and then it reminds them of something about their wedding, and it's brought up, this guy Biloxi lies about his college days, which reminds Tom to ask Gatsby about being an Oxford man. And this time, Gatsby doesn't really lie. He says he can't exactly call himself an Oxford man. He went there. He was there for like 5 months. But Tom really is not going to back down from this, because he's really trying to reveal who Gatsby is, especially since he's seen the connection with his wife. So it's interesting though, if the right topic came along about, I don't know, social class or something like that, this would make a great claim. Just Tom Buchanan, when he says, self-control, I suppose the latest thing is to sit back and let Mr. Nobody from nowhere make love to your wife. Well, if that's your idea, you can count me out. Nowadays, people begin by sneering at life, family, and family institutions. Next, they'll throw everything overboard and have intermarriage between black and white. Notice how he always gets back, and then he says, flushed with his impassioned gibberish, he saw himself standing alone on the last barrier of civilization. And I think that would make an interesting claim, just as Tom Buchanan and his civilization going to pieces with the American dream, with the change, and all of that kind of stuff. So if the right topic came, that would be something that a different angle, because a lot of people are probably writing about the Great Gatsby, and they're probably going to write about the American dream. And if you do that as well, that's fine, but you have to figure out a different thing to say about it. You don't, usually people will end the sentence with representing the American dream. What about it? What are you going to argue about it? And using something like this, like the idea of a civilization going to pieces for aristocratic ideals or something like that. I mean, you got to take it somewhere that nobody's gone before, and and make it an argument, make it an interpretation, make it interesting. I mean, don't worry about, I think students kind of get caught up on like, well, if I say this, are they going to question me and think that I have the wrong interpretation? They are not going to care. As long as you can back it up, it's much better than just saying the obvious. Back it up with text, keep making your argument, even if it's a stretch, do something with it that's not been said. And don't give plot. The reader knows the plot. Everyone knows the plot. But they might not have ever seen it through the eyes of Tom Buchanan. So that, it's just an idea. So at any rate, he and Tom get into a fight. He brings up the drugstores and stuff like that, but he does that because Gatsby finally says, I have something to tell you. Your wife has never loved you. Now, I think I've mentioned this before. Daisy has never really said that, probably. This is part of Gatsby's imagination, and in his creation of their life together, just like the child hardly exists, well, Tom doesn't really exist for him either. He's just kind of a detail. So he explains, they marry, and he says, I don't even know how you got a mile within Daisy's house. And what Tom does, I think it's kind of strategic, because if you notice, like in the new movie, the Baz Luhrmann, they have to always add lines to help you see the interpretation, because you don't have the text in front of you. So in that movie, he explains that, when Gatsby in the movie says, so I have just as much money as you, so we're the same. And Tom says, no, we are not the same. Well, that's not in the text, but that's what's implied in the text. And he reminds Daisy of that. That, okay, you like this guy. First of all, he's a crook. How are you going to live? And why would you be with someone like him? And as this reality becomes clear, you see that Gatsby loses control, and Nick, in some of the movies, it looks like they're going to fight, or that they do fight, but Nick says at that moment he looked like he killed a man. And so you get the idea that there's this just complete, utter anger and no self-control when he gets to that point. And then as Tom paints a picture for Daisy about, his Wolfsheim connection and these drugstores and all that kind of stuff, she starts to see him for who he is, and what he's had to do to make himself. But really, how would you go on living with somebody like that, or being married to someone like that? It's not really realistic. And so, and then he begs her, just tell him that you've never loved him. And so she tries to say it, and Tom comes back with, you never loved me, not even that day I carried you over whatever bridge so that you wouldn't get from the punch bowl to keep your shoes dry, Daisy. And she says, don't. And Gatsby's losing control, and he says, just let me have her alone. She's getting excited. You got her all excited. Now, if I just get her to myself, I can bring her to her senses. And in both of them, in a way, are speaking for her, of just like taking authority over her voice. And finally, she's able to say, you want too much from me. This is a line that comes up often in literature. It comes up in Mrs. Dalloway, where it just finally gets to the point where when a man really possesses and wants everything about you and to get inside your head, it's just kind of intrusive in a way, and it becomes too much for her. And so she starts the way he describes it, drawing further and further into herself. And I think when he says that, she starts to think about who she is in her, I guess, kind of aristocratic background and who she is, and kind of realizes that this has just been kind of a fling, and that even if she's not incredibly happy with Tom, Tom is what she knows. That's what she's comfortable with and secure in. How would she break that going with somebody who's kind of a gangster, you know? She wouldn't do that, and it becomes very clear to Tom that this is no competition. He just kind of laughs it off, and he even suggests, go ahead and take her home. It's fine. Have your little goodbye. And so, of course, then you see the accident happen. Myrtle sees the yellow car like she did before, and she runs thinking Tom is in the car. And Wilson had been keeping her in a room and is going to take her out west whether she likes it or not. And she runs out, and this is the way it describes it. Let's see. McEllis and the man who reached her first, but when they had torn open her shirt waist, still damp with perspiration, they saw that her left breast was swinging loose like a flap, and there was no need to listen for the heart beneath. The mouth was wide open and ripped at the corners, as though she had choked a little in giving up the tremendous vitality she had stored so long. Remember I told you about that smoldering. This is what kills the yellow car, which is like a symbol of wealth and freedom and fun. And going to the Valley of Ashes, in comparison, like in juxtaposition, it kills the vitality of another person's dream. I don't know that I've mentioned this before, but you notice how Daisy and Jordan are always wearing white dresses. In Daisy's childhood is in these white clothes. And then you have that juxtaposed with the Valley of Ashes. So I'll go back to that idea, but I think I mentioned yesterday too about, or whenever your day was, the green breast. Well, that's at the end he describes it. So, but there, I think there's a connection of having the ripped breast, as the green breast is like the green light, opportunity, and it's just ripped out of her. So you have to think about what Fitzgerald might be saying about, the working class people opposed to the wealthy people. And he will say something more about that. So, of course, Tom stops by, and he's kind of on the same level as Wilson. They're both heartbroken. Probably Wilson more than Tom. But there is something, I think, kind of redeeming about Tom in this, that you do see that it's not like he's completely heartless. But he does make sure that he helps Wilson understand that he was not driving the yellow car. And, of course, I don't need to go over all those details because you can very easily read it, and it's straightforward. So they get home, and Tom sends for a taxi, and Nick Carraway doesn't want to go in and have supper. He wants to stay outside. And, of course, while he's outside, he runs into Gatsby because Gatsby's waiting outside just to make sure that Tom doesn't hurt Daisy. And Nick says he's not thinking about her. And that's true. He's not. Tom is completely over that. But in Gatsby's mind, he still wants to protect her. And he's still very delusional. And even when he asks about the accident, he knows what happened. He says, "Oh yeah, I told Daisy that I thought she was killed instantly. I think Daisy took it okay. She'll be okay by tomorrow." And Nick points out that, through this entire tragedy, all Gatsby can think about is how Daisy's going to feel. And then this is where the question of who's driving the car comes up. I think that people just automatically assume it's Daisy because Gatsby says it's Daisy. But Gatsby has been lying the whole time. I mean, he hardly ever tells the truth. And so when he says, "Well, I tried to swing the wheel and broke off," and Nick immediately assumes, "Oh, Daisy was driving?" A minute ago, he didn't like Gatsby for Gatsby's attitude, and now it's Daisy. And I think, and I could be dead wrong, but part of the reason why I think it's possible that Daisy was driving is because it's, or not driving, is because Fitzgerald is showing us how quick we are to assume that Gatsby is right. And it's easy to blame the woman. So I'll go back to that at the end of the discussion, but let's just keep that in mind, that it's ambiguous. Because here's Gatsby telling this to Nick, and when Nick hears it, he says he guessed at the truth. And the whole time he's having a hard time figuring out it. 1 minute he believed everything he said, and then 1 minute when he's believed everything and nothing that he has said. At this point, he guessed at the truth. And it's also part of that point of view thing. This could be a good discussion for an essay as well. How do you know it's Nick's point of view? So I'm going to go back to that idea when he meets Tom later, because I think there's something else that's kind of telling about that scene. Into chapter 8, and he finally Gatsby comes home in the morning, and he goes over there, and they kind of restlessly go through this huge house and try to find, cigarette butts or whatever, and he begins to talk again about everything that this is where he says he got the real story that we got a little earlier. And here I marked, "But he didn't despise himself and didn't turn out as he imagined. He had intended perhaps to take what he could and go, but now he found that he committed himself to the following of a grail. He knew that Daisy was extraordinary, but he didn't realize just how extraordinary a nice girl could be. She vanished into a rich house, into a rich, full life, leaving Gatsby nothing. He felt married to her, that was all." So that just kind of gives you more of a background of when he tries to go back and find her again, he can't really find her, and he compares it to trying to find the lost Holy Grail, and so it's a quest, I guess, also in a way, could be a quest, like I said the other day, just of a quest kind of back to subconsciously going back to the mother, the woman figure, whoever that is, but wanting to rediscover her or find her, and then you can't ever go back. And even Nick says you can't repeat the past. You can't go back 5 years and act like everything's going to be the same. And for Gatsby, because he hasn't moved on from that moment, he doesn't see it that way, because his whole life has been, in that infatuation. He's married to her in his imagination, his mind. So again, a delusional thing is he says, "I don't think she ever loved him." And she even said, I couldn't even if you got me by myself, I still couldn't say I I never loved Tom because it wouldn't be true. And so he says, you must remember, old sport, she was very excited that afternoon. And he told her those things in a way that frightened her, made me look like I was some kind of cheap sharper. And the result was she hardly knew what she was saying. Again, it's like treating women like a child in a way, like, you can't, as if she can't make up her own mind. You can't get her excited or say this. You might make her think this or make her think that. I don't even think you can do that to children. But anyways, so they end up leaving each other finally, and he decides he's going to go for a swim and he's going to wait for Daisy's call. Nick says one of the last things he says to him is, they're a rotten crowd. And that's the thing he's really been wanting to say all along to Gatsby, is just stop trying to make yourself out to be one of them. You're not born into it. You're not going to ever have it. But it doesn't matter because they're a rotten crowd. And he says, you're worth the whole damn bunch of them together. I was glad I said that. It was the only compliment I ever gave him. Let's see. So he says goodbye, and they leave. Jordan says, you weren't very nice to me. He says, well, I'm sorry. I've got things to do. And they end up hanging up. And then he traces the steps of Wilson. The guy, McAllis, stays with him as long as he can until he gets tired. And I like the conversation he has with them as he tries to figure out, does he have anybody he can go to? And he says, have you got a church to go to sometimes, George? Maybe even one you haven't been to in a long time? Maybe I could call up a church and get a priest to come over. And he says he doesn't belong to one. And he says, well, you got to belong into a church for times like these. What do you do? This is why we have church. He points out that he's realized that she is having an affair because she finds the dog leash. And the other guy is saying, it was an accident, and Wilson's getting it into his head, and he thinks he knows, like, when he really knows something, that this is true, and all he's got to do is find out who the car belongs to, which we know belongs to Gatsby. Okay, so I'm going to read the last part of this chapter, just Gatsby's in the pool, and then I'm going to make another video to finish it. And so the way that Nick describes this is he gets the sense, and I mean this is just his story, but he gets the sense that maybe Gatsby even realized right at the last minute that this dream was not going to happen. And so he imagines him thinking that if that was true, he must have felt that he had lost the old warm world, paid a high price for living too long with a single dream. He must have looked up at an unfamiliar sky through frightening leaves and shivered as he found what a grotesque thing a rose is, and how raw the sunlight was upon the scarcely created grass. A new world, material world, being real, where poor ghost, breathing dreams like air, drifted fortuitously about, like that ashen, fantastic figure gliding toward him through the amorphous trees. And so that ashen figure is like Wilson, who comes from the Valley of Ashes. Same description that he used in the Valley of Ashes of a fantastic, figure or farm, fantastic farm. And now this figure that comes to kill Gatsby. And I wanted to just say one thing about the description of a grotesque rose. Little things like that is easy to remember so that you could write about it. And there's a lot you could say about that. One of the things that um, I would say, or I would maybe quote, not expecting you to do this, I just really wanted you to actually see this quote because of that. But it's from Gregory of Nyssa, and I'll just read it to you. Which of life's most treasured objects endures always? What flower of prime, which is like the grotesque rose? What gift of strength and beauty? What wealth, fame, and power? They all have their transient bloom and then melt away into their opposites. And this is what he has to say actually about the monastic life, which is practicing asceticism. I think I mentioned this in a King Lear video, and I talk a little bit more about that with King Lear. But it was an argument for celibacy. And his argument was really that it's almost not worth the pain. And of course, in a monastic life, you don't want anything that distracts you from getting closer to God. And he points out that it is a distraction. And when you think about the narcissistic love too that can sometimes take over, it's not a good place to be. So anyways, I'll finish Great Gatsby in the next video. Thank you.